Identity is the domain of the ego. The ego is that part of ourselves which attaches or identifies with the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that we, the ego, identify with. Transcending the ego, we have the witness. The witness, cultivated traditionally, most commonly in Buddhist and other meditative and reflective traditions, is the part that witnesses the ego identifying with the pattern. The witness identifies the pattern but witnesses the pattern. The ego identifies the pattern and attaches to the pattern. Now, in this tension between letting go and holding on, in the balance of those two, we have life and freedom. When we only and exclusively hold on to the pattern, define ourselves by the pattern, we become imprisoned in logic and reason. We become imprisoned in the dictates of the pattern. The ego is the part that gets offended. The ego is the part that feels violated, because all patterns of energy are violated when violation is defined by collision or mutation. Whenever two patterns come together in relationship, either one pattern changes the other pattern, or the other pattern changes the one pattern, or both patterns are changed by the interaction. Now, the ego identifies with the pattern and holds on to the pattern and feels traumatized, feels overwhelmed, feels threatened when the pattern is asked to change, when it experiences a mass bigger than itself on a different trajectory with a different pattern of energy, and is frightened of death, of dissolution. Because the law of mass dictates that when a pinball and a bowling ball collide in opposite directions, the larger mass absorbs the energy of the smaller mass. The smaller mass explodes in a chaotic and unexpected direction. Meaning most egos, when they collide with a large energy, feel overwhelmed. They weren't predicting the collision, and they weren't predicting being sent flying. It's not a law of intelligence, it's a law of mass. So the bigger object, the heavier object, scatters the smaller object. And when the ego identifies with the smaller object, it's a traumatic event. Now, sometimes the ego switches identification, meaning if you can't beat them, join them. Disidentify with the pinball, and identify with the bowling ball. That's politics, understanding there are different forces moving, emotional memes moving through a cult, a culture, and that the politician that's going to win is going to be riding the biggest waves. Now, identity, ego, is both a blessing and a curse, a prison and a liberation. It's a shape, meaning an identity is a pattern of thinking, a pattern of feeling, a pattern of speaking, a pattern of doing, a pattern of being. And emerging out of the one, the shape is a crude rendition. The pattern is an effort at the complexity of life, an effort to capture some of the complexity of truth, but it never does. It's an imperfect rendition of the sphere of the one. No system is perfect because you have the ecology, the grace, the one, and one descends into language, which is a system, which is a particle, the masculine expression. And the masculine principle divides the one into regions called words, called language. And this becomes a hand, and this becomes a foot, and this becomes a toe, and this becomes an eyelash, and this becomes a bit of hair, and this becomes an eyebrow. Because the one is cut up through language into many. It is an integrated whole until viewed through the prism of language. But the language is never perfectly symmetrical. It also leaves gaps. All systems fail to be perfectly efficient because the conscious mind is not complex enough to grasp 200 trillion distinctions and counting in motion, in perfect unity. So it creates a heuristic map. If you think of a landscape, thousands of trees, millions of pine needles, rocks, dust, little undergrowth, it's too complex. And so when navigating through that forest, through that landscape, we use Google Maps. And the entire complexity of all those millions of pine needles is reduced to the crudeness of a grid, a street grid. And we don't say count 300 million pine needles and then at the tree with the bark that's 111 meters tall where the crow is up on top, then turn right and count the asphalt pieces. No, we just say, go straight 3 miles, turn right 2 miles, go north. And then it's 47. So this is an incredibly simplified rendition of reality. It's a system for navigating reality that isn't real. It's not even a tenth as complex as what is. In other words, anything we can put into language, and all thought is framed through language, is a speck of 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 what actually is. There are universes in the spaces between the atoms of one hand that are vibrating There are particles that are vibrating 10,000 times faster than the word faster, which means that language can never catch up. Language can catch up to very slow, crude patterns. I see it's moving from summer to winter, we say. But we cannot speak about the movement of a single atom in the summer or the winter, because the dynamic relationship between the constituent particles within the atom are so fast that by the time we can think them in language, they've changed 100 million times. It's too complex. Now, the ego is that which binds to and attaches to the pattern that we invent to express ourselves as habits. A habit of speaking, a tonal habit, a visual habit, an erect habit, a habit of gesture. That's me, that's my habit, that's my pattern. I recognize it, I see it. We don't see all of it. We see a tiny piece of it. Who we are is far more complex, far more multidimensional than the language we have to perceive it. Now, in this way, the ego, the identity, the cult, the culture, is both the most imprisoning, wretched, miserable obstacle to grace, and is the necessary vehicle of evolution. So without a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, without that pattern to say that's me, without the ego identifying with it, holding on to it, the pattern falls apart. When only the witness is present, there's no attachment to anything. Someone wants to take your body, it's just a pattern. And it will be consumed by life in one form or another and become another pattern. There's nothing personal about the witness. The witness watches what he is. The witness is free. But the witness has no motivation. The witness is not attached to pain or pleasure. The ego is attached to pleasure and attached to avoiding pain. And pleasure is often the symmetry, the strengthening of the pattern, praising the pattern, supporting the pattern, cooperating with the pattern, attuning to the pattern, understanding the pattern, empathizing with the pattern that is me. I am the pattern, and you take the time to understand it. My pattern feels stronger because you take the time to understand it. You take the time to see it. You take the time to feel empathy in response to the pattern that I am. I am the pattern. And the witness witnesses the pattern, witnesses you responding to the pattern, and is free of the pattern, and feels no attachment to how you do or do not respond to the pattern, feels no attachment as to whether or not the pattern lives or dies, changes into this or changes into that. because the witness is free of identity, of attachment. Now, when we are too stuck, when we are too frozen, when we are too attached to a very specific pattern, we cannot change. We cannot let go. In many ways, you can see the ego and the witness as the inhale and the out and the exhale. They are partners. The ego inhales, and without the witness, it would hold that breath forever. But the witness lets go. All right, time to move on. I can let that go now. As soon as the witness exhales, the ego inhales and holds on to something else. Now I'm this, and I'm not going to let go of this. I'm never going to let go of this time. Now, I'm speaking particularly of the traumatized ego, because the traumatized ego is the identity that was shattered, that was violated, that was out of control, that was in pain, that was in terror of more pain, that was helpless, that felt helpless, that no one responded to. And so when the ego claws its way out of that horror, out of that shock, out of that loneliness, and finds something new and solid that seems to protect it from drifting back into that helpless state, it clings to it tightly. Clings so tightly that life starts to die, because life is in the balance of the inhale and the exhale. But the ego wants to hold on for fear of being out of control, of letting go. The witness wants to let go and let go and let go. And yet the ego takes in the new breath so that there is something that can be let go. And so the identity and our attachment to the identity is both our shape, our vehicle of experiencing life and of expressing ourselves in life. The attachment is both the engagement with the pattern that allows us to influence the pattern. It is the vehicle of evolution, that we must hold on to a pattern. And then the witness is what allows the pattern to evolve. Because if we say, no, this is the only way, I want this way, and only this way, I'm not budging until I get my own way. At a certain point, my own way, my identity, my pattern, is the biggest block to my next step forward. It always is. Meaning, the identity right now is the step forward to what was, and it is the block and the prison keeping me from what will be. And so it's a dance, it's a balancing point from identification and letting go and transcendence. Working really hard, achieving a goal, and letting go of our attachment, of working hard to change this into this, and then letting go of it so that it can become something even more. It's a step. It's a breath. Our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being determines 90% of our behavior. What we identify with and hold on to dictates 90% of everything we do that we cannot evaluate on a daily basis. I don't think about the English language. I just use it more than 90% of the time. I don't reinvent the English language and the structure of words. I accept it. And as an accepted language, it is both a technology, a tool, and a prison. You see, because there is no word in the English language for that which is on the edge of consciousness flying towards joy. And so I don't think about that. There is no word in the English language for the grief of the spinning circle that I cling to desperately because I don't want to lose myself in overwhelm, in the unknown. And so I don't notice when I cling to those sadnesses, those miseries, because there's too much new patterns around me and I'm afraid of losing coherence as a pattern. There's no word for that which is most intelligent in the form of cultural design. Cultural design is not even an active paradigm. It's a crossing of two words that are rarely connected. We talk about it's my culture, but we don't talk about designing a culture. The habit is set by the cult. And that habit both staves off chaos, blocks and blockades us from the unknown, but it also stops us from entering the mystery. Identity is the most powerful technology on the planet because it determines 90% of human behavior. The habits determine what we eat, what we think, what we feel, what we do, where we work. It's a matter of habit. It's a matter of identity, not moment by moment analysis and reinvention. Because the moment by moment analysis and reinvention of an entire personality in an entire life is too complex an equation. We don't have enough RAM to process all of that power, all of that choice on a moment-by-moment basis. So 90% of the time, we repeat the pattern that is familiar. And then 10% of the time, we decide between this and between that. And in most cases, less than 2% of the time do we redesign the pattern and change an area by conscious design. And yet that is a choice of empowerment, to move into position as a conscious designer of our own lives, of our own patterns, of our own identity. And as enough people step into that role, we transcend the personal transformation into repetitively following the patterns that make up our identity, to designing a culture, to designing that pattern as a people together based on the question, pursuing the quest. How can we organize time, money, natural resources to generate the most sustainable probability field for well-being per unit of energy invested? What if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? Could we generate more well-being for more people, for more of the planet, with less energy, less time, money, natural resources, less attention, less intensity, more grace, more elegance? That is the ultimate quest. It is the ultimate question to explore individually and collectively. An identity is a resting point, a default mode, a habit. And the power lies in shaping that habit consciously and then surrendering it to the unconscious to bring up again periodically, to evolve it, to develop it into a more intelligent form.